we were saying, Nikki, that you were at the APAC ELT convention. How many years ago? That was really a really funny anecdote.
Yeah, actually, my first presentation in public ever was in 1992 at the APAC convention. I mean, probably half the audience weren't even born in 1992.
I was 12. I was there.
Really? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my first ever talk, I did a talk, I remember, on using videos, and I showed a couple of, you had to in those days use an old VHS recorder and kind of press record at the right time. And there was a program called, las 40 principales, and I would, record everything and then used a couple of those videos with classroom teaching ideas. I remember being so terrified. And amazingly, here I am all these years later doing a talk, and we're still talking about technology. So slightly more sophisticated, but yeah. It's wonderful to be back at APAC anyway.
And it's great timing because it's 20 years later, right?
Exactly, yeah. And of course,
it's 2022, there you go.
Right. I've been as a participant to many APAC conferences, but to be a presenter again 20 years later, yes, nice. Life has sort of come full circle. Right. There's nothing left for me, to do now. That's it. I've done it all.
You've sort of closed the circle now, right?
Exactly.
Well, in any case, it's really nice to have you back. And yep, I mean, as usual, what we've done is people ask their questions through the chat. I think some people are saying hello still. Okay. Some people are still coming in, and we can look at the questions at the end if you're okay with that.
Yeah, fine.
And just for internet speed purposes, okay, everyone's turned off their cameras and their microphones, so that's cool. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'll just leave you to it. So thanks so much, Nikki.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. And hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Lovely to see some familiar names there as well. Hi, Jared. I see Chris. I see a couple of people. Lovely to see you all here. Thank you so much for coming. Well, I'm going to be talking about digital literacies. It's a subject quite close to my heart. These are the books that I've written and co-written over the last few years, and you can see that there's one called Digital Literacies. That was originally written in 2013 with Gavin Dudney and Mark Pegram, and we have the second edition actually coming out in a couple of months. So digital literacies is something that's been on the map for a while, as indeed have technologies. And as you can see from the books, that technology really is my thing. It's the thing that I'm most interested in. I actually started teaching online, fully online, in 1997. Again, probably half of you weren't born then yet either. But I was invited on as the academic director of one of the first fully online MA programs in linguistics. It was run through a consortium of Spanish and Latin American universities. And we used a learning platform called WebCT, which then became Blackboard. And we also ran real-time tutorials with the students who were all over Latin America and Spain. Can you imagine, in those days, the only tool that we could use for real-time communication was MSN Messenger, which is like WhatsApp, but a simpler version of. It was just text. That was the only way you could communicate. So you can imagine running an MA tutorial on, second language acquisition theory through text. It was very slow. So it's been interesting for me to have been involved in teaching online and technology really for quite a long time, and to see the incredible change that we've had, especially over the last 2 years. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about that. You've all no doubt gained a lot of experience with online teaching since March 2020. More on that a little bit later. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, though. Sort of background. You might have noticed that I have a bit of an accent, let's say. I'm originally from the country in picture number 1. That's the flag. Does anybody know what country that is? Those of you who know, what country is number 1? You can put it in the chat box, by the way. That's the place I was born. Yes, Usoa, that's right, South Africa. Exactly. I was born in South Africa. But then I moved for a few years to country number 3, which is, you all know that one, right? You can put it in the chat box. Country number 3 is, okay, this is where I realized that everybody's gone off to get a cup of coffee instead of staying for the talk. All right, Salvador, thank you. And Marta, Exactly, the UK. I spent 6 years in the UK. And then because the weather was frankly so dreadful, I just had to leave as soon as I managed to get a British passport. And I moved somewhere much nicer and sunnier, which is, of course, not country number 2, Spain. I should probably have a Catalan flag there instead. Spent a couple of years, I've spent, in fact, many years here near Barcelona. Country number 4, though, what country is that? Do you recognize that flag? If you could just pop it in the chat box again. Right, Monica, Australia. Yeah, Salvador again. Yeah, so I've spent time in Australia. I've never lived there for a long period of time. I've been lucky enough to travel there several times. And at the age of 19, when I was very adventurous, I backpacked around Australia on my own, hitchhiked for 4 months. And I've always had this kind of love relationship with Australia. It's the country that I always wanted to live in. So I have a kind of a parallel life in Australia that never quite happened. But it is an interesting and wonderful country. And I'd like to share a little bit of information about Australia with you. It's got so many wonderful animals, as you all know. Have a look at these statements. These are common. Well, some of them are well-known Australian animals. Some interesting facts about them. How many of these statements do you think are false? If you could just put the number in the chat box, the number of statements in total that you think are false. So if you think they're all false, put 6. If you think 3 of them are false, put 3. If you think none of them are false, put 0. I'll give you a chance to read and put the number in the chat box. Thank you, Anna. Anna thinks 5 of them are false. Michael thinks none of them are false. Alicia thinks all of them are false, all 6 of them. Salvador thinks 2 are false. 3, okay. Yeah, all right, we've got a good range of opinions. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come back to these in a little while. I'll just leave those with you to kind of sink in, all sorts of weird and wonderful facts about Australia. Let's talk a little bit about digital literacies. What are they? Could I ask you to type a couple of words that you associate with digital literacies or a definition in the chat box? What do you think they are? How would you define digital literacies? Any ideas? Thank you, Maria. Maria says ICTs, right? Thank you. Does anybody else have any other ideas? Okay, so Anna has a similar definition. Computer skills, we've got apps. Michael says things like office, technology skills. Jared says a familiarity with online resources and interaction. Digital tools, says Cruz. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Often we do associate the idea of technology first with the idea of digital literacies. I'm going to give you a definition which is a little longer. Obviously, you didn't have the kind of time or place to write a very detailed definition, but here is one. So I think that that digital literacies are these things: the individual, technological, and social skills needed to effectively interpret, manage, share, and create meaning through a range of digital communication channels. So you'll notice that we're looking there at technological skills, but also social skills, because those things go together, right? We use digital products these days, or digital tools, to communicate first and foremost. All right, that sounds fine. It's quite vague though, because, you know, what does it actually mean in terms of what teachers should be doing in the classroom? You probably know this, but most ministries of education in almost all countries in the world now have some sort of definition of digital literacies, or digital competences, I think they call it here in Spain. And most ministries of education understand that these are skills that need to be developed in school systems, at primary, at secondary, and at university level. So there's a common consensus that digital literacies are important these days. And there are many ways to define them. This is one way. And it all sounds wonderful on paper, but what actually happens in the classroom. And that is really what I'm interested in. Before we start looking at ways to bring digital literacies into the classroom, though, I want to just quickly look at one way of trying to understand the construct, because the term digital literacies is quite big. It's an umbrella term. So Mark and my co-writers, Mark Pegram and Gavin Dudney, and I came up with this kind of construct, way of understanding. What are these things? How do we break them down? And we came up with a series of different foci or areas, right? So I'm going to just quickly talk you through this. This is the sort of theoretical background bit of the talk. So communicating is the first area because, of course, as I said before, we do communicate a lot in the digital space and we use digital tools to communicate. And then within them, we have these various sub-literacies, we might call them. So multimodal is another term for multimedia, but we use the term multimodal these days. It's a more up-to-date term. Immersive, talking about using things like virtual reality or augmented reality. Of course, mobile technology is a huge thing. So mobile literacies are important. A little bit of code, the minimum amount that you need to be able to sort of get by. Print literacy hasn't really gone away, right? I mean, we've always taught students to read and to write, and we just have more digital channels through which we read and write these days. And print literacies have therefore developed, if anything, they've expanded. We have different sorts of print literacies in the digital space now. Use of hashtags is one example. I like hypertext literacy. I think hypertext literacy is a good example of what digital literacies are. Let me explain what I mean. Let's imagine that you give your students a writing task and you have a class blog. So you have a digital sort of writing space and your students in pairs need to write a blog entry of, let's say, 150 words on the city of Barcelona. And one pair is writing about, food, the other one is writing about history, the other pair is writing about culture, etc. Students do their research, they start putting their text together. When they have it all ready, they type it up and then they post it in the blog. Now, of course, the wonderful thing about hypertext and digital text is that you can add photos on the one hand, so you can make things look nice, and you can also have hyperlinks. So, of course, hyperlinks, those blue links where you have a word that you can click on and it'll take you to another place, either in the same text or in this case, to an external resource, maybe giving you some more information about something that you've written about. Think about this 150-word text. Let's imagine that one pair of their 150 words, they have 75 words hyperlinked. What is the effect of that on the reader? When you're reading a digital text, which has pretty much every second word hyperlinked, what is the effect on the reader? That's a real question for you. And I'd like you to write your responses in the chat box. What do you think? How would you? Yeah, Marta says it's annoying. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Why? What is annoying about it? After all, it's just words. Why is it annoying? It's off-putting, says Chris. It is. It is. Yeah. There's several things happening here. There's been a bit of research done into hypertext, and they've done kind of experiments on the same text with a certain amount of hyperlinking, no hyperlinking, lots of hyperlinking, and the results are perhaps not surprising. Basically, the fewer hyperlinks a text has, the higher the retention of information. So in other words, texts with few hyperlinks are easier to read and easier to remember. The more hyperlinks you have in a text, as somebody said, it's off-putting, it's annoying. You don't remember as much afterwards. So hyperlinking has a very strong effect on the reader. It's distracting, said Jared, exactly, from the overall meaning. It's also off-putting, as Chris said, in a way, because you're constantly, every time you see a hyperlink, you're kind of pausing subconsciously, even if it's a split second, and you're thinking, oh, I wonder if I should click on that and go and see, and then you decide to click or not click. And if you do click, of course, what happens is you end up wandering around the web doing this, this verb called wilfing, W-I-L-F, wilfing, which stands for what was I looking for? I'm sure you've had that experience before. So there's the whole issue of the amount of hypertext. It also kind of questions your authority as a writer, because if you have to include so many hyperlinks to other stuff or external sources, it suggests you don't really know what you're talking about and that you don't really have your own voice. So there's all sorts of things going on here when we're producing digital text. Hypertext is an interesting example of digital literacies because on the one hand, you need to create those blue hyperlinks. That is a technological skill and it's not difficult to do. But on the other hand, you have to be judicious about your hyperlinking. And this is where the social skills come in, because you need to think about the effect on your reader. So there's that kind of double, there's two sides to digital literacy. It's a technological, which is often the easy side, and then the kind of the social or the communication side, which is sometimes a little bit more complex or a little bit more difficult to think about. Okay, our second area is this idea of informing, so information online, and we have here, of course, search literacy, essential, one of the most essential literacies we can have. There's then filtering, so from that massive information, making sure that we don't get bogged down in too much of it. There's a wonderful term called, well, there's information overload. I'm sure you've heard that one, but my favorite is data smog. This idea of just so much stuff out there. It's a smog, data smog. Tagging and hyperlink, hashtag literacy are related literacies here, and then information and data literacy. I'll come back to that in a bit. I'm not going to describe each of these sub-literacies. We would just be here for the rest of the night. So I'll skip through this. Collaborating is our third area, and here we have kind of personal literacy, so looking after your, how you come across online, your personal identity. It's got to do with projecting a desired identity, but also protecting your personal information. Network literacy, so leveraging networks for communication and perhaps for professional means in our cases. Ethical literacy, so ethical ways of communicating online, and participatory and intercultural. They kind of speak for themselves. And then the last area is this idea of designing or creating or redesigning. And here we have attentional literacy, critical literacy, and my personal favorite, remix, more of which later. I just wanted to give you a very quick kind of theoretical framework for this construct, which is one way that can help us as teachers sort of understand what we mean by digital literacies. It helps us to break down this quite large concept into smaller chunks and then bring those into the classroom to work on. And I'm going to show you a couple of these literacies and how we can bring them into the classroom. Okay, I suppose the first question, though, we need to ask is why? Why would we bother with digital literacies? Who cares? We're English language teachers, right? Isn't our job to teach phrasal verbs and the like? Well, Howard Rheingold, who's a US educationalist, has this to say. And I think he has a point, right? We need to be able to keep up with the literacies, not with the tools. You've probably had this experience of, learning to use a new tool and you get to grips with it and then suddenly you have to start paying for it, whereas it was free before, or it just sort of disappears and it's not there anymore. So it's not about the tools, it's about the literacies, because the tools come and go. But once you've built up some basic literacies, you're equipped to deal with pretty much any tool that comes along. This is Mark Pegram, our co-author. I love this comment from him. I'll just give you a chance to read it. And I think this is the key for us as teachers, right? It makes our English language classes a little bit more relevant to real life at the end of the day. All right, I'm going to show you how in a bit. Let's go back to our statements. One of these is false. All of them are true except for one. So which number do you think the one false one is? I didn't express that very well. Which number is false? Yeah, Chris, 4. Absolutely. It's number 4. The Phylactus plummetus is a rare predatory koala. And let me show you the Phylactus plummetus, otherwise known as the killer koala. Here it is. The killer koala, known as a drop bear. Now, if any of you are Australians or you've been to Australia, you may have come across this kind of national hoax. Australians take great pride in fooling people from other countries. And this is a kind of a national hoax that people just keep going. Australians know this isn't true, but they like to try and fool people and convince them that it is true. This, if you're working with students and you want to look at information online and work on information literacy, which is basically, you know, giving them some fake information and true information, letting them research and find out what's true and what's not. The drop bear is a really good example that you could use with students. The reason is because there's a lot of information online about the drop bear that looks sort of convincing. So the first image here on the left is a magazine, a fake magazine cover, the Australian Geographic. It kind of looks like it could be a real magazine. You can find that online. And the best thing is, if you start to research the drop bear, you'll come across these YouTube videos about it. So it really seems to exist once you start looking into it. Chris spotted the Latin. Chris, you're probably the only person in the entire world who would have spotted that. But isn't that lovely? The plummetus, from the verb to plummet. Yes, totally ridiculous. So the lovely thing here is you can get your students, you know, present them with the drop bear as if it's a real thing, get them to investigate it and see if they figure out that actually it's this complete, you know, nonsense. So it works on search skills. You'll have students reading, but it's also working on these critical skills and letting them kind of think about what they're finding online. This is an absolutely essential skill, as I'm sure you will all agree. I want to talk more about this basic information literacy. It's the most important one by far. Okay, so I think when we come to information literacy and looking at information online, the first thing that our students need to learn is that they need to triangulate. So look at least 3 sources, or 2 or 3 sources, and then verify these sources. You know, how reliable are they? What is this Australian Geographic? If you start looking into Australian Geographic, it doesn't exist. So, you know, looking a little bit behind what they first see online. I don't know whether you teach primary or secondary or university students, but the truth is that by the time students get to university, you know, they're not great at doing this. They're not good at triangulating and verifying their sources. We looked at digital literacies a minute ago with that construct of the 4 areas. Think about yourself for a minute. So on a scale of 1, which would be the lowest, and 4, the highest, how digitally literate do you think you are? Could you just put the number in the box, in the chat box? So if you think you're just not digitally literate, you would put number 1. If you think you're really pretty digitally literate, put number 4. All right, most people are 2 to 3, and there's 2.5, all right. Yeah, you know, your digital literacies may well have improved a little bit since the pandemic and the lockdowns and so on, but they may just have been the kind of technological skills that you had a chance to develop that you didn't use before. 3 to 4, says Britannia. Yeah, lovely. All right. We have a fairly digitally literate bunch then. Think about your students. What about them? Where would you put your average student? 1 at the lowest or 4 at the highest? All right, we've got 2 again. Numbers are fairly similar. We've got a range for the students, 1 to 2, 1 to 2. Yeah, M Diaz, I'm not sure what the M is for, but yes, absolutely, a lot less than we and they think, especially with young learners. There is a bit of a habit, isn't there, where we think, well, they're all 14, they must be brilliant online, and this is so not the case. I mean, they, you know, they'll have a PhD in Instagram, but that's about it, right? They're not very good at things like, you know, searching online and being critical of their sources, for sure. So we do tend to overestimate, that's for sure. Thank you for that comment. Okay, there's a study here that I would just like to very, very quickly talk to you about. It was carried out a while ago, 2013, by FRI and a group of researchers, and they basically decided to look at how digitally literate students are, and they looked specifically at 13 to 14-year-olds. Now, the reason I'm telling you about the study is because the results were quite interesting, and it was also a pretty well-designed study. They looked at 60,000 students, I mean, huge amount, 60,000 students aged 13 to 14, so about grade 8, from 3,300 schools in 21 countries. So we're talking about a large study. They also included in the study 25,000 teachers, school principals, IC coordinators, And the way they did this was they set all of those 60,000 students a practical task. They had 4 different tasks that were designed, and then they randomly assigned tasks to students. And the interesting thing about the tasks is that they were designed on real world or real practical digital tasks, right? Not just, hey students, how digitally literate do you think you are? That's the worst kind of study you could possibly run. This is one where they had to do stuff. And the things that they had to do were, for example, one was students had to create a very simple website. They were given certain things that they needed to include in the website. Another one was that they needed to research the topic of breathing and then create a PowerPoint presentation to then present to younger students aged 8 to 9. So you can see how, you need digital skills to do this, but you also need other skills. Then what they did was they scored the students based on their tasks from 1, which was the lowest, up to 4, which was the highest. So my question to you is, of all of these 60,000 students across 21 countries, what do you think the majority scored between 1 and 4? 1 is the lowest, 4 is the highest. Can you put the number in the box? What do you think the average was? Right, most of you are saying 2. They were, exactly. The majority was 2, which is fairly low. 81% were between the levels of 1 and 3. So there were very few outliers who scored the number 4. But yeah, the majority was 2. You're correct. There were some interesting additional factors that they found affected students' digital literacies in this study. For example, one was the students' expected educational attainment. So in other words, whether they were good at school already or not. Another interesting one was their parents' educational level and profession, and the kind of socioeconomic background. And really one that I found fascinating was the number of books in the home, print books. Another one was access to ICT resources at home and also in the school. And all of these things had a positive impact. So the kids who had these things did slightly better, or they were slightly more digitally literate. And I have a nice question for you as well, because they found some interesting results for gender. Who scored higher, girls or boys? What do you think? Girls or boys? Uso says girls. Anna says girls, yeah. Yeah, I mean, in general, girls do score higher in school systems, don't they? Yeah, and this again is true for this study. The girls all scored, well, they were more digitally literate except for 2 countries. And I don't know which the 2 countries were because they don't mention it in the study. I was dying to know. Couldn't find out though. Okay, thanks for that. Interesting study. You may have heard of this particular study as well that was carried out at Stanford University in the States in 2016, and a similar sort of thing. They looked at a lower number, it was about 8,000 students now in middle schools, high schools, and university in 12 states in the United States. And the study basically tried to see how easily you could fool students, like what we just did with the drop bear. They did that, not with the drop bear, they used other materials. But what they found was that students were pretty easily fooled, that they did, believe a lot of fake stuff online. But what was interesting about the study was that text, they were fooled by text, but if there were images with the text, and especially if there was a video, they were even more fooled. So when you have fake information that has photos, and especially if it has video with it, it's more believable, which is also an interesting thing to keep in mind. So there we go. I mean, there's a consensus that students need support with developing these fundamental digital literacies, the most important of which is information literacy. Okay. So if we're going to be talking about fake news and stuff online, I mean, we have to talk about COVID. I'm sure you noticed this yourself, and this is talked about all the time, the amount of fake news that the COVID crisis has generated. The top screenshot here at the top, this is from my WhatsApp, and it's a message to me from a very good friend of mine. What she did was, here you can see she's talking to me, she forwarded me this piece of audio, which I then played, and the audio was not her, it was somebody else, I think it was a woman's voice basically saying, my friend knows a doctor in South Korea, and this doctor says that if you hold your breath, if you can hold your breath for more than 30 seconds without coughing, then it means that you don't have COVID, right? So I listened to this and I thought, really? And of course, I just had to hold my breath. Even though I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Who is this person? Who's this doctor in South Korea? And what has this got to do with COVID? But there's this thing about, you kind of can't resist trying it. But I didn't pass this piece of information on. It seemed to me pretty unlikely. Who is this? What doctor? It was all very, very dodgy. So you yourselves may have received this audio. Did you? Do you remember if you received this? Or you might have received other stuff. And there was a lot of sharing of fake information through social media, WhatsApp especially. Another interesting thing, though, was this tweet here on the bottom left by Olivier Véran, who's apparently at the time, I don't know if he still is, the French health minister. I probably don't need to translate that for you if you're Catalan Spanish speakers. But he's basically saying that taking anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen or cortisone could aggravate the infection of COVID. And if you have fever, then take paracetamol. And if you're already taking anti-inflammatory drugs, or if you're in doubt, then talk to a doctor. Okay. So this is the French Minister of Health. But of course, it turns out that this is just not true. This is a piece of fake information that was passed on by none less than the Minister of Health. There's a very interesting study that was carried out into what happened here. How is it possible that somebody in this position is sending fake news? And a study was carried out by 2 PhD students at the WOC here, actually, in Catalonia, about where this came from, where this piece of news originated and how it got here. Apparently, it was originally in Germany, but it was obviously so nonsensical, people just ignored it, and then it crossed the border into France, and then the French sort of seemed a little bit more interested in it, and the health minister ended up, hearing about it, believing it, and passing it on. So there you go. The one on the right-hand side, you might have heard at the time during the lockdowns that Amazon was not going to be bringing you your, important articles. You might have heard that one as well. And then there were a couple more things. There was the whole toilet paper rush as well. I don't know. I don't remember if it was a big deal in Spain, but it was in the UK. And there we have the lack of toilet paper in somewhere in the States. And then we have another this is on Facebook this time, a piece of news about some toilet paper being infected with COVID and how it all has to be sent back again. I don't know if you came across that one. And these are just some examples of the fake news that was circulating at the time. So this creates quite an interesting class that you can do with your students. And the way to do it is a bit like what I did with the Australian animals. You can start with some statements and get them to decide whether they're true or false. So here we have the statements that are based on what I've just shown you. But you wouldn't start by showing the students what I've shown you. You start with statements, right? And then you get them to investigate. They first decide if they're true or false, and then they investigate, and then you debunk all of these myths. The best place for myth debunking is Snopes. I don't know if you're familiar with the Snopes website. It's a wonderful website. It's kind of a fact-checking website where all of the current rumors and stuff that you might hear about and you're not sure about, they check it out and they do a good job and they report on it and they show you where it comes from and why it's not true and so on. So this is a very good site to then recommend to students. You can set up a class where you give them some fake statements, or maybe some are true and some are false, get them to investigate and then report back and make sure that they learn about the Snopes site. So this is a nice way to bring basic information literacy into the classroom. It's basically a reading activity, reading and speaking activity, but it's useful. This is useful. These are useful skills that your students are learning. I like this graphic from the World Health Organization. It just shows you how misinformation can be spread via social media. Let's have a look at it. And this is a nice way to round up the class so that your students can actually take action on on this, not pass on fake information without checking it. Okay. I just had to share these with you. These are, I'm sure you had some wonderful memes and messages during the lockdown, but these are some of the ones that I received on social media that I just loved. They were just hilarious, and I had to share them with you. I'm not sure if everybody speaks Spanish in the group, so I've just translated the two that are in Spanish. But aren't those brilliant? They made me laugh so much at the time. Okay. All right, so we've looked a little bit at information literacy, and this is basically looking at information and disinformation. An interesting question for you quickly. What is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? Does anybody know? Would you like to try? I'll give you a definition in a minute. Yes, those memes are great, aren't they? Okay, so misinformation is basically fake information or incorrect information that gets passed along inadvertently. So for example, that audio message that I got from my friend about holding your breath to see if you have COVID, she actually believed it. That's why she sent it to me. She thought it was true. And she sent it to me. I listened to it, held my breath, thought that's not true, and didn't pass it on. But that's an example of misinformation. She's not trying to fool me about or convince me of anything. Disinformation is misinformation, wrong information that is deliberately and maliciously spread. So it's stuff that people deliberately put out there just to, disrupt or for whatever nefarious ends they may have in mind. That's the difference, by the way. I'm the kind of person now who listens to the BBC News, and when they use both of those terms interchangeably, I go mad. That's misinformation, not disinformation, or the other way around. All right, so we looked at information literacy, absolutely the fundamental literacy, and I now want to look at remix literacy, which is a kind of a fun one, the idea of creating things with technology. So let's look at this meme. This is probably the most famous meme and the most enduring meme of all times. Does anybody know the story behind this? What is this image? Where does it come from? What period of history is it from? Just put a few keywords in the chat if you know where this comes from. Yeah, exactly, Marta. And yeah, both Martas, yeah. The Second World War. It is indeed from the Second World War. It was a poster that was produced by the British government during the Second World War, and they produced a number of these kinds of posters which were put up around towns, cities like London and other big cities to sort of boost morale during a terrible time during the war. But this particular poster was never put on public display during the war. And what happened was, in the early 2000s, a box of these posters was found in an attic in a house in northern England. The people who found it, we took it down to a local bookshop, and they displayed a couple of them in the window. That's how it started. And people sort of liked it. They recognized that it was from the Second World War. It was a certain style. And there was something about the early 2000s and this which people just found kind of, amusing in a way. And it became very popular. It started appearing online. There were T-shirts made, coffee cups. It just spread virally in the very early days, really before the internet, or before, Web 2.0. But then online, what happened was this. So you had the original, and then you had the remixed version of it. And of course, this is how the meme of Keep Calm started. And you can see that there are certain rules when you remix. You keep sort of certain parameters. Remix is a very creative process, but within very strict parameters. You have the same block capitals, the same amount of words, you have the monochrome background, you have the icon at the top. And after this first example of the meme, we got this kind of thing happening online. And these are just some of my favorites. I love these. They're interesting though. If you look at the one on the top left, right, keep quiet and continue working, we have an icon at the top. And essentially we're talking here, it's a kind of critique, isn't it, of an entire political ideology, if you like, right? It's a critique of communism, because you need to understand this icon at the top to be able to understand what this is saying. And if you look at the one next to it, it's the same thing. It's another critique of, well, capitalism in this case. So these two are they're quite sophisticated. If you take a 13-year-old and you show them this, I'm not sure that they would understand these, apart from the words. I mean, even if it was in the first language, there's a certain amount of cultural, historical knowledge that you need to understand these two memes. The Batman one, well, you just need some knowledge of popular culture. And this one on the bottom right here, keep calm and fake a British accent. That's an interesting one, isn't it? So my question for you is, why a British accent? Why not a French accent, an Australian accent, an Italian accent, an Icelandic accent? Why British? It's a real question for you. Why do you think? If you could put your ideas in the chat box. No idea, says Marta. Well, it's interesting though, isn't it? Why British? Teresa says, okay, it's the coolest. Those of us who don't have a British accent, I'm not sure we agree, but yeah, okay. It's cool. Easiest to understand. Marta thinks the British accent is more sophisticated, yeah? Interesting. There's all sorts of ways you can interpret this. My personal interpretation of this one is that there's a stereotype of the British always being what they call the stiff upper lip. In other words, that in the face of crisis, the British are always calm and stoical. It's a complete stereotype. It's not true. But to me, that's what this says. But this is my interpretation. There's no reason why your interpretations are not correct. But it's an interesting conversation to have. Memes can be open to various interpretations. So of course, bringing memes into the classroom, show the keep calm meme, get students to investigate the story, get them to choose some of their favorite keep calm memes. And then of course, stage 2 is they produce a keep calm meme themselves or another meme. So here are a number of meme creator websites. The first 4 are websites, but you also have apps. So for example, for your mobile phone, you can find Keep Calm apps. If you just search Keep Calm in the App Store for Android and for iOS, you'll find apps that you can use to create Keep Calm meme. Incredibly easy to make these memes. And then of course students can share them and all the rest of it. It's also nice to get students, before you start work on the Keep Calm meme, to share any memes that they have seen recently or any memes that are going around, because memes are often reflecting current views or current events or politics or whatever. And they can be in the first language. It doesn't matter. The whole point is to have a discussion about memes. There's also a wonderful website called knowyourmeme.com, where you can kind of investigate the history or the story behind pretty much any popular meme. So worth having a look at that as well. So I'll leave you with that. Before I finish, I want to leave you with some words from Henry Jenkins, another US educationalist. Okay, those are very strong, very critical words. And he's, of course, not talking about us. He's not talking about English language teachers. He did make this comment in 2009, so a very long time ago, and things are changing. But in a way, I think he has a point. The fact that what we do in classrooms, generally speaking, is disconnected from the real world. We should be bringing in the kinds of skills that students need to be able to function in the 21st century, and that includes digital literacies. As English language teachers, we are actually really well placed to be able to include digital literacies in what we do, because so much of online communication happens in the English language. It's easy for us to find material. So I would argue that we are perfectly placed, actually, to be including a focus on digital literacies within our focus on English language teaching. I think we have exactly 2 minutes left for questions. These are my contact details. I'd be happy to share the slides with you. If you would like them, just drop me an email and let me know. And time for questions if you have any. I'm going to see if there are any from before.
Thanks so much for that, Nikki. People were talking about the British accent before. I'm not sure there are no questions here.
I didn't leave enough time for questions. I'm aware. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I mean, if anybody wants to ask something, we still have time.
Thank you, Jared.
Oh.
I hope you like the memes. I like the
Memes were
wine
hilarious.
tour. Your next wine tour made easy. That was brilliant. Yeah, Chris, thank you. Yes, memes can be created by students, but how important is this for their learning of English? Something they're doing out of class and TikTok, yes. Yeah, I think memes are just a vehicle through which you can engage your students, in real life things. But I think memes, there's two things. There's, they're speaking, they're reading, they're researching in English, they're being creative. Often we don't get much chance for that. But memes are also an important vehicle for communication in the 21st century. And they can be critical, they can be very sophisticated, like those ones that I showed you before, of the critique of communism and of capitalism. Those are really sophisticated memes. There's a lot of unpacking that you can do of memes, a lot of cultural information, that kind of thing. So it can open up to a wider discussion as well. If you're looking at, I look at it in the context of a skills class. So we can get them creating memes in a creative way in the context of teaching skills. You could also make sure that, say that they mean, if you really want to have a focus on grammar, make sure you use a phrasal verb in your meme. But personally, that wouldn't be my focus, but it could be.
You can also work on humor through memes, and humor could be a complicated issue. I mean, it requires a sophisticated command of the language to get jokes and to get so.
Yeah, good point. So yeah.
Okay, everybody's saying thank you, thanks a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for coming along, and thank you everybody for contributing in the chat as well. That's always lovely.